Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Future of XYZ. It's always exciting for me to introduce our guests, but this one is really thrilling. Chris Down is the Executive VP and Chief Design Officer at Mattel, the world's largest toy manufacturer, and we're going to be talking about the future of play. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today on Future of XYZ.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm particularly excited to be a part of this because I love play. Of course, it's inherent in what I do and what we do here at Mattel. But I love design. I mean, you know me, and you know that I was born and raised a designer in a designing family and a designer household. So it's kind of in me. So I love that intersection. By the way, one quick note for your listeners. We are the largest multi-category toy company, but I will say Lego edges us out as far as being the largest toy company within a
Wow.
single category. I know, but I gotta say it. I gotta say it.
No, it's good and it's wild because it will come up because it is the multi-categories of Mattel are what make it in some ways so ultimately fascinating. I mean, obviously you lead design and innovation for the global toy maker, which has 7 categories, as you just mentioned, at scale. You operate in 35 countries, sell in over 150 countries, publicly traded, 30,000 plus employees worldwide, owned vertically integrated manufacturing in some cases. I think 5.5 billion of net sales last year, and a study that we're the shape of play, which we're going to be able to talk about as well. But I'm fascinated because you just mentioned your own background in design, coming from a design family, but you also studied industrial design undergrad at University of Notre Dame. You got an executive MBA from UCLA's management school, which is Anderson. But you're LA based now. I guess headquarters is El Segundo, near where I grew up.
Yeah.
And play just feels kind of innate to, I think, Mattel, to toys, but it goes beyond that. So I think for the sake of our conversation, Chris, let's start as we always do in Future of XYZ and define play in the context of today's conversation and your expertise.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I could probably write a dissertation, and I think dissertations have been written on kind of what play is, and the value that it provides to society and to people and to kids. Um, I think of it kind of simply, in that it's really it is an activity. It's any activity that is there to deliver joy or provides joy. So there's a motivation behind it, but then that opens it wide up. And I think in the course of our conversation, we're probably going to talk about some of the dimensions of play. We think about those conventional ones, whether they're happening on the playground or whether they're happening in a sport. Those are more straightforward in that they're conventional because oftentimes, certainly in a sport, there's a beginning, there's an experience, and oftentimes there's an end or a goal that's driving people and motivating them to do something, but all in the spirit of gaining some sort of benefit, and joy is the nucleus or the common denominator in most of those things. What we found though, kind of in our observations, and as we look at the constellation of observations that are out there from others, um, there are true benefits to play as well. So we think of it as frivolous, I think, off the cuff, but actually the value to society, to human development, and to connection is profound.
Um, it's true because when people will have seen the title of this episode, Future of Play, I'm sure it's fun and games, right? That's how we think about play. Um, but it goes beyond that. And I think, my next question is you teed it up beautifully, Chris. I mean, you spent 3 decades in play, let's just call it, across multiple industries, but you design board games for Parker Brothers, you produce award-winning video games at Hasbro Interactive, another huge toy maker. You co-founded Atari's innovation practice called Atari Labs, and now as the chief design officer at Mattel. Um, Everything else aside, to the point that you were just trying to make, play at its most basic is what, and why does it matter in the year 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think that play play at its most basic, I think it takes it takes the interest and the motivation of the person who's engaging in it. So while it is purposeful, it is also voluntary. And so I think that there's an aspect of that. And the interesting thing is some people in certain circumstances don't even realize that they're playing. And in fact, before you hit record, Lisa, we're chatting and we're bantering back and forth. That's a form of play. That's a form of play that's actually driving connection. And it's establishing kind of levels of trust. It's also helping us to navigate and understand each other as we enter into a more formal dialogue after you did hit record. And that is an aspect, that is a dimension, and that is a version of play. And we just and we may talk about it a little bit more. It's really topical because only just a few months ago, we fielded a massive study. It's called appropriately called Shape of Play. It was with over 30,000 respondents, people that we interviewed and talked to around 7 different countries. And we learned more about both the formal and the informal definitions of play. And in some ways, it's impossible to define it down to one thing or one elegant line, because it does manifest, even in the example that I just had, in a lot of different ways that you're like, okay, well, upon reflection, I get how that's play. Even though it's not a game of Uno, I get how that's play. Uno is also play, by the way, number one game in the world.
And also part of Mattel's portfolio.
But yes, I mean, even playing around and joking, I mean, there are a lot of things. Digital, of course, is a dominant platform for play these days, and it's not just in video games, but it's also how people are communicating and playing in social media and other forms of engagement through digital devices. Oftentimes, social connection has play kind of at the root of what is motivating those interactions, which is also which is also interesting. So social engagement is a significant dimension, and often a common denominator for play.
We're going to get into the study, but I have one other question, which I think, we just talked about Uno, but Mattel is celebrating its 80th anniversary this year. Obviously, 2 years ago, the Barbie movie came out and told a little bit of the Barbie historic story. You have Hot Wheels and Fisher Price and American Girl and obviously Uno and Matchbox and Polly Pocket and a whole bunch of licensed product to boot. What does the mission of Mattel overall have to do with play?
Uh, well, I mean, I'd say the mission has everything to do with play. And, for your listeners, our mission is to create innovative products, which actually I'll unpack the whole thing maybe afterwards, but it's create innovative products and experiences that inspire, entertain, and develop children through play. All of that, and I would say that our mission is even expanded because it's not just children that play. It is all, all people in all places at all stages of life. But the mission, when you think of the role that I have here at Mattel, which is a creative role, we are the creation engine of the company. We're coming up with what's next. We're working a year to 18 months in advance. And so we're constantly looking at culture and society and trying to understand what are our consumers interested in today, only to give us signals of what they might be interested in tomorrow in the future. And that is when we think of kind of the Webster version definition of innovation, and we think of like innovation is new. What we create is not just new to be new, but it's also to scratch the itch or to provoke play experiences that, whether it's open-ended play that a child may be experiencing on their bedroom floor, or whether it is more directed play that's bringing communities of people together, bringing in Uno or Scrabble or any of our other kind of board games that orchestrate a level of play. And we also have products that orchestrate play. A Hot Wheels track set, unboxing it, putting it together, and then seeing whether you can make that loop or avoid that dinosaur chomp. Those are aspects of challenge and play that are somewhat directed that have open-ended aspects to it. So when we think about our mission and the idea that innovation is in there, products and experiences is in there, and then there's a value aspect of inspiration, entertaining, and also development. And we think of like childhood development ages and stages, and yes, all of that is true because you can't put a product, a product that's designed for an 8-year-old in front of a kid that's 3 years old and expect that they're going to have a great experience. So we have to know all of that around child science and development. But we say develop children through play. We're developing all ages through play. And even if you are, middle-aged like me, play is still, like us, like many freelancers, probably play is still a huge value proposition as it relates to our own development. Actually, and like just a little bit of an audible, it reminds me of there was uh, uh, a scientist, Dr. Stuart Brown, way back. I mean, this is decades ago, and he was the founder of the National Institute for Play. And your listeners can go down the rabbit hole and discover all about it. It still exists today. But what was interesting about Dr. Brown's work was he and I don't remember all of it, but he had like these principles and properties of play, and kind of understood and acknowledged and unpacked and gave names to kind of these dimensions of play and learning for kids and for adults.
Cool.
The thing that sticks out to me, and it's a little bit wild, is that he also talked about what the consequences were for being play deprived. And like some of it is relatively graphic, so I won't get into it, but from an emotional development, a social development, there bad things could happen. And
It's interesting because intuitively that makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense, right? I mean, exactly for the things that we're talking about, like just communication, right? Playful communication, enjoyment. Like if you don't have that sense of play, which, like I can imagine and forget the toys and the interactivity and the entertainment. Like I can totally picture like that doesn't bode well for people, for humans.
it really does. I mean, some of the obvious things are, kind of risk of depression and things like that, but and mental health issues and all of these other things, and I think there's a social aspect to it as well that amplifies it because lack of play does kind of um, uh, lead toward isolationism, and I mean there are all these other things. But then you think about like the value, the other end of the spectrum, and Brown did talk about it, and we talk about it, and this is a big part of what came out of our study and what we have also observed over 80 years of existence, is the positive value of play. And it isn't about just making the social connections, but it is about, in this day and age, it's there is a development and a challenge aspect. Brain health and development at a young age and at an old age is there are true and measured benefits through play. And the fun aspect, the ability to have something that actually takes you into a different place where you almost kind of lose yourself in those moments or in the moment. Those are also huge benefits that
Interesting.
recharge, that are additive. It's what we do. It's not a zero-sum game, and we're not like an electric car battery that the more you do, the battery comes down. In some cases, play is actually energizing
Yeah.
in what it provides, not just in your own personal development, but also how you feel.
It's totally fascinating. We have so much to get through because this turns out, unsurprisingly, as many topics with Future of XYZ, but this one in particular, Chris, and your own deep background with it, that there's a lot more to unpack than we have time for. But I do want to give a brief moment to the Shape of Play study that you just referred to that, came out in April. And last year, you guys surveyed 33,000 people in 7 countries. In really brief order, and I know that it's not gonna there's way more, so I get it. But in really brief order, what insights did you guys gain about the following topics? And I have 4. The first is something that you mentioned, which is ages and stages. What was like your major takeaway there?
Okay, so one piece of context, and I really appreciate the question, because from an ages and stages point of view, we are experts, and we have been since like the dawn of time for this company in understanding children and early childhood development. So there's not a lot that that sounds wrong, but we know a lot about the youngest consumer from kind of, we call it birth to bus. Um, and our Fisher Price division has a play lab. They have experts, PhDs on staff that study they study and they observe children, and they fuel our practice to ensure that from an ages and stages point of view, we're making the right toys that are going to be developmentally on point and are going to deliver the best experiences for children and for the parents of those children alike. That's our Fisher Price division. And that kind of bleeds and flows and influences the rest of our toy practices that start to age up. The biggest observation from an ages and stages point of view out of these 33,000 respondents is play is so alive and well, and there's actually a much greater recognition of it and appreciation of it at an older age than we have ever observed before. But this is also the first time that we've done any kind of scaled engagement. You mentioned already, thank you, 33,000 people, 7 countries, where we went around the world and talked to all demographics, all walks that you can imagine, and did not focus on children. In fact, we over-indexed our time looking and learning more broadly on purpose, because it's the first time that we've done something like this. And the level of fidelity that you can have in a conversation or an ethnographic observation, because we also went into homes, was significant. And what we learned is that I brought up much of it, and I'm talking about it like it's totally fluent, like play is for everyone. I think we intuitively knew that. What the study told us, in fact, 94% of all of the respondents said, yeah, we believe that play is important, not just for kids, but for everyone. I mean, we asked them, we talked to them, and they told us that.
Yeah.
They also said, I mean, it was something like more than 85%, like, like between 85 and 90%. Emotional benefits, like play, truly, these are our response telling us reduces loneliness, reduces isolation, and also have, makes us feel better and more healthy, whether they're trying to, stave off early onset Alzheimer's or whatever. So I would say that
So interesting.
The biggest aha and kind of endorsement for us was with the older consumers. And we define kind of 13 plus, there's 18 plus, like we have all of these kind of segments of consumer. But as you get into middle age and later, because we also talk to seniors, amazing the role that play plays. Sometimes recognized and kind of defined, and they've created language and understanding around it. Oftentimes they're talking about it as like, oh, that's play. And
That's so amazing to me, because it changes. I mean, I don't want to get into the business too much. I have a couple of questions around that in a little bit, Chris. But obviously, in terms of the interest and the capabilities, or like the leveling, these insights about ages and stages, and certainly like getting into elders, or much less just general adults, changes kind of what the offering of play must be when you're thinking about the mission.
It does. It does. Look, something that is always a surprise, I would say nowadays, because it's a rather new phenomenon and that's only happened in the last 4 or 5 years. And I'll ask you the question, and maybe maybe we've talked about it before, but do you remember what like the fastest growing segment of toy consumer is in the world, in the industry?
No.
It's the adult consumer, which when you think about toys are specifically designed for children. They have been for, since the dawn of toy existence. And here it is, the fastest growing. And now, not just the fastest growing, which you could say, well, we just went through COVID, and so a lot of things have happened, and that is true. That did act as an accelerant of a trend that we were already starting to observe around circa 2019, 2020. But it's not only accelerated, but now it is the single largest segment. So all of these subsegments of consumers, it's the largest segment
Amazing.
of consumer. And so, we launched an adult directed platform back in 2020, in February 2020, called Mattel Creations. And it was, not to make it a sales pitch, because it's not, but it was a platform designed specifically to engage adult, kind of the 13 plus consumer, those that might be consider themselves like collectors,
That's what I was going to say. It
collector,
seems like
or hardcore.
collection.
I'm collecting Barbie dolls, or I'm part of the Red Line Club and I want to collect Hot Wheels. And those are really deep collector bases. What we found is those acted as kind of on-roads to this larger collector and adult play enthusiast community. And it went from us selling one toy to a subsegment of adult enthusiasts to being the today in Mattel, it's the fifth largest retailer that we have, and it's just adults going to one online platform called Mattel Creations.
That's amazing.
So it's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. So that's a little bit of a sign of the times. It's a reflection of consumers, whether they recognize it or not, the why they're engaging play. And you could see it. You could see it with some of our very worthy competitors. We brought up Lego before, but like Lego Botanicals, we brought, Hot Wheels is the number one selling toy in the world. Hot Wheels sells to both kids and adults. A lot of these kind of ubiquitous.
You know that I have a lot of Hot Wheels in my house at the moment.
I do
And
know
those
that.
are not children's.
I do know this. You've recently acquired a massive collection,
Yep.
and they're worth something too.
Yeah, we're going to figure it out. But
Yeah.
I think, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting, and there are a lot of other aspects about the study, I mean, from gender and market differences and things that we're not going to have a chance to get into, Chris, but like with your professional background, which covers physical play and digital gaming and industrial design and business management, you really intimately, I think, understand the dynamics between brand, like the dynamics and the power between brand, that value of play, and then how getting it right translates into both consumer love and sustainable business value, which is, I think, what you're talking about. Are there some cultural leadership opportunities on the horizon for you guys right now, given these insights and given kind of the changing dynamic of play?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think that I don't know that anybody wants to be, there's always a balance. I don't think that people want to be necessarily preached at, and there's always this spectrum that we consider when we're making a toy, is like it ranges from good for me to fun for me. And you can think about that as, we have learning toys and learning products for our youngest consumers, and you think Fisher Price, and you can probably imagine what some of those might look like, whether it's Rock a Stack at a very young age, or things that are more considered more fun for me, and Hot Wheels and track, and Thomas the train may feel a bit more fun for me, even American Girl. Inherent in those products are brand values that really do something that is not just developmental on the surface. And we talk about some of the kind of on the surface values of play, making connections, and experimentation and self-expression and escapism, and all of those benefits. But there are also kind of inherent values that are represented by certain brands as well. And American Girl is a good one. I'll bring that up, because in American Girl, you're learning stories about, in some cases, heritage characters, in some cases, modern characters, and you're learning about stories of character, stories that have real situational moments that are relatable, whether it was a character that was born in the 1800s and you're learning about them today, or whether it's a character that looks like you and has situations that maybe you're going through. You're learning about how to navigate through kind of formative moments in life. And I think American Girl has always been and continues to be a brand that has a brand value that delivers that. Barbie, I'll bring up as well. Barbie is a door opener for what are the, like, how might I aspire to or be something that maybe feels out of reach until I kind of see it or see myself in it. And that could be about a career, that could be about a fashion, that could
Mhm.
be about an experience, but it's opening doors of possibilities for how kids are seeing the world around them, but it's being put into their hands, and that's making it more attainable to them at a certain age.
It's
So
so
you,
interesting. Sorry to cut you off,
yeah,
Chris. I was just thinking, I mean, Barbie, obviously the movie was quite a phenomenon, right? It was a culture, we're talking cultural relevance. And I mean, the
yeah.
Barbie movie was a cultural phenomenon globally, not only in the US. I mean, obviously we don't need to get into like, again, you could write a dissertation, I'm sure many have, about why that is and what it meant. But like, is there, it was also beautiful marketing for Mattel, like, and for Barbie. Like it was probably one of the best executions I've ever seen. What do you think was the moment? Like, what was that? Do you guys have a feel? Is it that just people were hungry for play and recognition and some fun and lightness, or and it wasn't all light. Obviously, like there was a lot in there that wasn't light at all.
Yeah, well, I think that there are a lot of reasons, and I think that that's, we talk about like four quadrant films and who they're appealing to and why, and I think that that it was a film that in many ways, I mean, the creativity that Greta Gerwig put into her interpretation of the Barbie brand, I think was a lot of the magic sauce. I think that that magic sauce wouldn't have tasted as good if it wasn't on top of something that was truly an authentic representation of what it, like, choose your age. You could be 7 years old and a Barbie fan, or you could be 70 years old and a Barbie fan, or you could be somebody that knows Barbie because it's part of kind of the cultural zeitgeist in the world,
Totally.
um, and know a thing or two about it. And it delivered to what you knew or what you understood about that brand. So the idea of like authenticity, I think was an important one. It wasn't Greta telling a story painted in pink with the label Barbie that didn't feel authentic to the brand. So I
Yeah,
do think authenticity is important. I would say building off of that, and you've heard me talk about this because actually when I think you're in my first not actual physical interaction was a distance interaction in that it was at
South by
the
Southwest.
Peloton, and I talked about the Mattel playbook, and we talked about the very thing, the example of Barbie and the example of American Girl, but brand purpose. So, what is the purpose that brand is supposed to perpetuate? And I think the idea of feminism and the idea of like possibilities and what that represents through the brand lens, brand purpose was very evident in the film. Where it really came alive was the cultural relevance. You think about like what's going on in kind of the world, national politics, and everything else, and the tensions that are happening, and empowerment, and kind of the realities of the real world, in the escapism and the opportunities of a fantasy world, and how do I actually take control of the things that feel totally out of control. um, there's a cultural relevance aspect of the interpretation in that Barbie movie that I think was spot on.
Totally.
And then that goes to another aspect of the playbook, which you've heard me talk about, consumer centric innovation, which is understanding from a consumer insights point of view. What is the itch that we need to scratch? What do people want to hear? Even if they don't know that they want to hear it,
Yeah.
how can we deliver it in a way that creates that appetite and ultimately that success? So I feel like when you think of brand purpose and consumer centric innovation and cultural relevance, the short answer that I found a way to make long is the intersection. The intersection, I think, of those things is what made the Barbie movie truly resonate.
It's so cool because I mean you're a designer and you lead design and there is a playbook, right? And it's about brand values, but it's also obviously about prototyping and playfulness and testing and consumer insights and design and materiality and all of these things. I mean, I've been to the studio, which is like, I mean, I wish everyone in the world could have that same opportunity. It was so amazing. It was one of my highlights of my career, and I've had many. Um, but, that I guess I'm gonna ask you a really hard question, or maybe it's gonna be a really easy question. On a scale of 1 to 10, Chris, your all's like, playbook or formula for design and your job, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much play is involved? 10 being like all play and 1 being like all business, because 'cause we're going into business questions next.
Oh boy, that is a really that is a hard question. I think that the play quotient, I wish it was always 10. I think there are aspects of my role that allow me to um mm, we all code switch, put it, depending on whether in the boardroom or in the playroom. And I do. I like to code influence, in that, what I try to bring to conversations that may be more serious or more business oriented, and an element of play to both remind us, why we're here, and who we serve. So, it's maybe a 7 or an 8. It's
I
not
love
as
that.
low as you would expect. Because I think that in all aspects, like design, creativity, and play can work their way in. And that can be as simple as an engagement or conversation. And not that everything has to, like, turn into a game of Uno or thumb wrestling, but I think that there is an aspect of playfulness that we have unique position as a company that develops designs and delivers play, should have. So and I think that there is tolerance and engagement at all levels of the company for that kind of orientation. And you've been through the design center, you've been through the studio, and you've seen it. And whether you're sitting in marketing or consumer insights, it's in here, like we're all, and consumer insights is part of design, which is kind of unique in
So awesome.
kind of the product world, but I think it makes total sense when you really think about, again, who we serve and what we create. Um, but you could, I didn't take you to the corporate tower where legal is, but even there, they have product proudly on display. Not that all the conversations are as fun as the ones that we're having over here in the design studio, but
That's what we
the play
think.
is around us. Yeah,
So I mean, again, this can go in so many directions, but I mean, I think just really, really briefly, I want to give you a chance to talk about some of the more serious aspects of the responsibility that you have as, one of the largest toy makers in the world, covering all these categories and now expanding not only from like developmental stages that we expect in Fisher Price, but now like going up to elders as well. I mean, there is a growing anticipation that let's call it innovation, but really technological developments are going to influence us. And you talked about digital platforms. What do you see? And Chris, I'm going to try to be like super brief on these because I have 4 questions related to this. But like, what's the role of technology and emerging tech, specifically like VR, AR, AI, blockchain, in the future of play?
yeah. I think that they're enablers both on the creation side as well as on the kind of delivery side and the product side. We so you've probably heard me. I've said it before, and it kind of, maybe it's a little bit old, but like Gen Alpha, Gen Glass, they could swipe before they could wipe. It's kind of a joke that feels like totally true. And the fact of the matter is that we have digital natives as the core of our consumer today. We also study what is the convergence where they love to play with digital as much or more than they love to play with physical toys. And the convergence is very young. It's like, almost, it's under 4 years old now, where they love to do that. Now, what we've learned also is their love of one does not mean that they don't love the other, just as much or even more. The like play consumption with physical objects continues to be healthy and thrive, and we're in a growth industry. All of that to say, I see opportunity as it relates to play. AR, VR. I mean, there are inherent issues. Like, we've been in the AR and VR space. There are inherent issues, developmental issues if you're in a VR situation at the youngest of age, and also there are physical issues of even being able to, kind of manage some of these technologies
Yeah.
effectively at some of the youngest ages. So, I think we're working through that, and we're experimenting internally. We've done some things with like ViewMaster, VR and AR, really, really cool, maybe a bit ahead of its time. And we will continue to play in those spaces. Even with AI, we launched, boy, this is now over a year ago. We got a Toy of the Year nomination for it, but Pictionary versus AI, where
Cool.
instead of playing Pictionary against each other, now you're physically drawing, but you're now playing as a community against the AI. Awesome game. But what
Yeah.
we learned is there's a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt as it relates to AI tied to Pictionary that consumers weren't ready to buy. So while it did okay, it didn't, it didn't blow the doors off the barn.
But these are some strategic bets that you're
They're
testing and learning,
they're
right?
bets. I mean, they're bets. We do 4,000 toys, 4,000 new toys a year. So
Wow.
we're constantly, and the innovation churn for Mattel, for the toy industry in general, is around 50% of our product assortments are brand new every single year. So we're always, there are failures, and you have to have failures in order to get the big wins. But
If
we're going to
oh
continue.
sorry.
No. But we're going to continue to do that in the play space from a craft, from an execution. If you're a designer sitting in Mattel, I mean, like, as long as I'm sitting in this seat, part of my job and role is to make sure that my teams have the best tools and technology available to them to do their best work.
Yeah.
And that could be about productivity, that could be about quality of execution, that could be about all of the above. AI represents a significant unlocker in terms of building superhuman capabilities into normal humans like you and me. And so we continue to work with multiple partners. I'll bring up one that we've talked about publicly in the past, which is Adobe. Adobe Creative Suite and Creative Cloud.
Amazing.
It's a set of tools that creators have had since
Photoshop,
my
Illustrator, go
my
on and on and on.
exactly, in
Final
design
Cut, like
school.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like, I must have been Illustrator 1.0 back in 1990. But the like, Firefly is kind of,
Yeah.
obviously it's next level in terms of taking mundane like generative fill. I mean, mundane tasks that have to be done in the world of graphic design and packaging and execution,
Yeah.
which is part of the creative team. And it's not hitting the easy button because you still have an operator that knows what their design vision is, but now their path to execution can be truncated in certain areas. We went through it with 3D printing. We went through it as we shifted
Yeah.
all of our wax and clay sculptors to haptic arms over 20 years ago. I mean, it's technology. It's profound, but I would say that the short answer is the door is wide open in terms of our exploration, providing we're doing it in a way that is safe for our consumers, and is also safe and pragmatic in terms of how we're managing our IP and other people's IP.
That's an important piece. I want to touch on the last question before the last question, Chris. Um, you talked earlier. First of all, you said like the toy industry overall is refreshing and introducing new about 50% of SKUs or products a year. I know that's not specific, but it's a lot. I mean, when we're talking about volumes like this, it's a lot. You also talked about using Barbie as an example, American Girl in representation. You're a juror at IF Design at the Design Award now, and you get to see a lot. I also head up global sustainability and impact. The social and environmental factors that are increasingly relevant, it seems to me, as a marker of design excellence. How are you also thinking about that in kind of like a huge portfolio? Like, how is environment, kind of impact and social entering the conversation, or has it always been there at Mattel?
Uh, I mean, I think when you talk about, all the way back to origin, I don't think it's always been there, but I would say that the last 15 years or so, certainly the last decade, it's been much more significant in terms of our planning processes, how we're sourcing, and ultimately how we're manufacturing and what we're putting in consumers' hands. As you know, it's there. We are a mass market company, and one of our values is not just to create the greatest play in the world, but also to make sure that we create the greatest access for
Mhm.
that play to the broadest range of consumers. That in itself has cost dynamics and availability dynamics and scale dynamics. What can you get at scale when you're doing, in some cases, millions and millions of units of things? What I will say is it is part of our design process. So we do go through design training so that we're designing for circularity, and understanding from a materials, from a processes, and from an execution point of view, what has to be true to ensure that we're creating the least impact, the greatest joy, and continuing to ensure that we're accessible. So it is definitely an intersection, that represents kind of the objective that each of our designers and creators has. But it's critically important. I will say there are certain brands that we use as kind of the sharp end of the stick or the wedge
Yeah.
in order to explore and do things more aggressively before they have to truly scale out. So we have the largest vehicle portfolio in the world. We have Pixar cars and Hot Wheels and Matchbox. Matchbox movie is coming out next year, by the way.
Cool.
And
Heard it
the
here first, guys.
heard it here first, exactly. But Matchbox is one of those that we use as kind of a creative wedge. And so we're playing with recyclable materials, not just conventional resins, but also with die-cast materials.
Very cool.
And instead of using, a PET package insert, using a pulp insert. So it's not just sustainable and recyclable, but it's compostable.
Yeah.
And so we're doing it. How are we designing a playset that might have an electronics module in it so that with the press of one button, by a parent, they can separate the electronics from the plastics and create
Which is
more.
part of the developmental education piece too, right? For the next
Totally,
gen. Yeah.
totally.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Chris, we're at time. So I would argue that in both your personal and your professional life, from what I know, what I've read, what I've experienced since we've gotten to know each other a little bit, you're really a champion of the transformative power of play. So as the final question I ask every guest, as you look forward into the future, let's call it 25 years, which is 2050, seems crazy. What's your greatest hope for the future of play?
There's not one. I look at play and I look at kind of our human journey as we're on a continuum. There's not really an end goal. That said, I do think that things like all of the materials that we create and the shape of play reminded me of is that the journey of play is incremental and the value is incremental as well. And so my hope over the next 50 years or 5 years or 5 months or 5 minutes is that we continue to get valuable play out there that enriches people's lives. And frankly, my most favorite value that play delivers is social connection, bringing people together. And so my hope is that we continue to do things that make people's lives better and make the communities better. So that's the hope. 50 years from now, what does that look like? I think it's a version of today, but we continue to progress. And I think even 5 years is going to be pretty great.
I think that's right, and I think connection. If we sum it up, what you've just said, in a world that's like kind of fragmented and disjointed, play is an opportunity for connectivity and pulling people together. So it's a beautiful hope, Chris.
Next time you're here, Lisa, we're playing a game in the studio. We'll walk around, get inspired, maybe print something out in the 3D lab, and then come back and play a game of Uno.
Happily, anytime, anytime. Chris Down, Chief Design Officer at Mattel. Thank you so much for joining us today on Future of XYZ.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. For everyone watching and listening, if you didn't already know, you can watch on YouTube. You can also leave us a 5-star review anywhere you get your favorite podcast or follow us on Instagram. We look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time. Thanks again.